don't have enough time, I'm so busy. And the data says that that is almost always untrue.
Noor Barrage has spent the last 6 years as the operational backbone behind some of the most successful online businesses, from solo founders to seven-figure CEOs. She's the person they call when growth gets messy. She builds the systems that scale, structures that hold. But it wasn't always this clear cut. She was supposed to be a lawyer.
Sales and marketing will scale rapidly. Delivery cannot follow because the operations aren't there. And then to hand out refund, and then profit suffers. I think a lot of people are afraid of structures because they feel like a structure could infringe upon their creativity, their freedom, but it's actually the reverse of that.
Is there one operational quick fix / win that you think almost every founder could implement tomorrow?
I would say
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Founders in Jeans. I'm your host, Emily Jean. And before we get into the episode, I just want to say a huge thank you so much for listening to my podcast. It means the world to me. I also wanted to say that if you enjoy the show, feel free to leave a review on Spotify or Apple, wherever you're listening to this, and also to follow us. You can follow us on Spotify, of course. You can follow us on Instagram at Founders in Jeans. You can also find me on Instagram at emily.jeans, or you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with people on there, and I have a lot of good conversations from listeners. Also, you can always leave a bad review for us. I'm totally fine with that. And in fact, I think that's exciting. I would love to know what we can do to improve. So you can also leave comments below and let me know what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy. I actually do read every single one. We also have a newsletter that comes out once a week, so you can get all the updates from us. We also put in some weekly business and marketing updates in there, as well as some personal notes from me. You can subscribe to that on my LinkedIn, also through the Instagram and in the show notes below. Anyways, that is all from me. I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode. I hope it's a good one, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye. Welcome to Founders in Jeans. Thank you so much for joining me today.
thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited you're here, even though I'm having such a hard time saying things today, apparently. But Noor, why don't you introduce yourself in your own words for people who have not heard of you yet?
Sure. So, like Emily said, I'm Noor, and I am also known as the Systems Girl on LinkedIn. And I basically help founders build businesses sustainably without the burnout and the horror that is hustle culture, which is so widespread in the business space. I have an amazing dog who is like my child. She is my life, and I love reading. So my degrees are in literature and philosophy. So I feel like I eat books in my free time. So when I'm not doing business, I have my nose in a book, and that pretty much sums me up, I would say.
Okay, good. Well, we're definitely going to have to come back to your dog and to reading, of course. But why don't we start? Okay, I'm get always curious about this. Obviously, you've worked with a bunch of different types of people before, solo hustlers, seven-figure CEOs. How do you explain to people what you do without other people's eyes kind of glazing over?
That's a really good question. So I would say that I help build structures around business owners and their teams that support them in getting closer to their result, their goal. I would say that's like a Cliff Notes version of what I do. I think a lot of people are afraid of structures, especially creatives and visionaries, because they feel like a structure could infringe upon their creativity, their freedom, but it's actually the reverse of that. So structures help support people in getting closer to whatever it is their goal is or their objective is. So that's what I do.
I love that. And I know on your LinkedIn, you call yourselves the systems girl. Like, that is a perfect way to describe that. I think that is such a good and cool and cute title. Like, it's straight to the point and totally makes sense. And before you moved into consulting, you started in the fitness industry, right?
Yeah, so I did my master's, and then after that, I was meant to go to law school, but because I had been in education pretty much nonstop since I was 3, I thought that I owed it to myself to take a year before continuing in education and then after that moving straight into the corporate world. And I thought if I don't take a break now, I probably will never be able to take a year out. So I took a year off. And in that time, for very selfish reasons, I decided to do my personal training qualification because I selfishly just wanted to learn more about training and training for women specifically and how best to support myself in my own kind of physical pursuits. And that led me to deferring a year further my law school acceptance. And I just did health and fitness for 2 and a bit years, and just kept kind of putting off the law school. Um, Started my own health and fitness business after I had worked in a gym for about a year because I was really unhappy with the way that trainers behaved in a gym. There's no regulation essentially. And I felt like there was a better way to support people and women specifically in um, just giving them the knowledge and the tools that they need in order to be able to train and to eat well so that they can build strength and confidence both in and out of the gym. So that's kind of what led me to moving away from the gym space and moving.
Right. And so I guess I'm curious, was there a specific moment in which you were like, okay, I want to pivot here, or I see that I have like more of a talent for turning business chaos into clarity?
Yes, I would say, and I think this is probably surprising or will be surprising to most. So I've been in the business space now for 6-ish years. Of that, I've mainly worked with other business owners and supporting them. But up until October of last year, I did that under the umbrella and the safety of a company. So I was a partner and I had the title of COO of that company, and I had a hand in everything. So I worked with some of the VIP clients who had bigger teams and who needed support around operations and leadership. But my kind of day to day was spent running the business and managing the actual team. So although I had been doing that work for about 4 and a bit years, wasn't until I left in October that I really thought, okay, I have so much more that I can give. And I owe it to myself to do it on my own and see what I can make of it. Because there was a lot that I disagreed with in terms of the leadership there. And I wanted to actively push back on a lot of things that I really don't like about the online business space and I think are really harmful to, more importantly, I wanted to show people that there is a better way to do business that isn't so all consuming and
Mhm.
so damaging to our health and our well being. It doesn't have to be the hustle and the burnout that most make it out to be. So I would say it was fairly recent, only, 8-9 months ago that I really felt, okay, like I can do this and I'm well suited to do this line of work and to be that voice and push back. I'd always known that I was good at the work that I do. I'm very naturally inclined to it. I'm like a control freak and hyper organized and always have been. And I've always gotten really great results for the clients that I worked with over the years that I did that sort of work. But I just felt like there was a lot more that I could do. And that was really scary for me because it meant coming out from the shadows. And I
Mm.
very comfortable sitting behind the scenes. I don't love the attention. And yeah, that was, I think, the scariest part for me is, the whole starting your personal brand and like being the face of things and stuff. And it still is challenging and it's something that I kind of grapple with daily. But I guess I get myself through it by telling myself that it's for a bigger purpose, and that the space needs voices that are pushing back against what is the norm.
So I'm curious then, in starting your own business, what are some structures slash systems you were putting in place in the beginning that you see other entrepreneurs aren't doing as much?
Yeah, such a good question. I'd say that when people think about structures, often they think that they have to be something really complex. And I would say that the majority of entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs that have very small teams, I would say under 10, if you have a good calendar system, if you have a good project and task management system, and you have a good planning and prioritization system, you're doing better than most organizations because most don't have that. And if you can set very, very clear annual goals and then reverse engineer those goals down to the day to day so that you know what needs to be happening day to day every week in order to get you closer to those goals, and you can collate all of those tasks and wider projects in a project management system so everyone knows what needs to be done, when, and where things are tracking in terms of progress. And then you can schedule those into your calendar and time block so that you have protected time if you're the CEO or the founder to think, to strategize, to create, and then on a more tactical level to actually execute on the things that you need to do. Then that is a large part of the battle already fought. So I would say those three for me have been really, really key. I don't have a massive team and I don't particularly want a big operation. I'm not going to say never, but I don't want that anytime soon. But I do have an assistant and we operate off of that structure.
Hmm.
As, and that has been really, really great because I don't have to micromanage her. I don't like micromanaging anyone. She knows what she needs to do. She knows what projects are coming up. She knows when she needs to do what by, X and Y date. And then she just kind of cracks on and checks in with me and makes sure that anything she needs from me, she's voicing ahead of time so I can get that into my calendar. So it's a really nice way to work. And the clients who I've worked with who have implemented those systems as well see an immediate alleviation of stress, and their teams also see the chaos going down and the
Mm,
productivity up because they know what they need to do and it's not so reactive.
right. For founders who are listening to this, how do they know when they're ready to scale versus when they just need to fix more of the basics?
Yeah, that's a great question. Scale is one of those buzzwords in the industry, in the online business world as a whole. Everyone talks about scaling. Um, what scaling really is fast growth. Now, I always try explain this in if you're building a house and you don't get that proper foundation in place and you just build the house really, really fast, eventually there are going to be issues. Things are going to break, you'll have leaks, etc. If you don't invest in proper infrastructure for your business, you can grow because, sales and marketing are great at pumping leads and, putting things out there and building funnels and cold calling and all of this stuff. But eventually things start to fall apart and they fall apart very, very quickly. So I would say that the majority of small business owners are not ready to scale. They should be looking at their systems critically and making sure that they have the right pieces in place to allow them to scale successfully because it's counterproductive. Like, yeah, you can scale, but then in a few months you're going to be having to plug holes and it's actually more damaging because your reputation is at stake and cash flow suffers because typically what happens is the biggest holes that we see is in delivery. So sales and marketing will scale rapidly. Delivery cannot follow because the operations aren't there.
Mm.
And then to hand out refunds and then profit suffers. So I would encourage founders to really look at their infrastructure and spend time looking at their operations because it isn't a sexy thing by any means, but it's so important. I had a conversation with someone, founder, Um, I think it was last week only. And we had a really great conversation. We talked about the issues that she's experiencing in her business. And I kind of suggested what was needed in terms of plugging those gaps. And she said to me, yeah, this sounds great, but I can't invest that much time and resources into operations only because, sales and marketing. Just think that there is a really important mindset shift that is needed in the space where people value getting that foundation in above sales and marketing. And then once that's there, sales and marketing can follow. But I I really struggle because, from a service standpoint myself in my business, I wouldn't bring people in if I wasn't confident that things would work and would work well and that the clients would have a great experience. I would rather, you know, maybe have a drier month or two and, have things be a little bit slower while I get those foundations in place and then go, okay, now we can focus on sales and marketing. But I think the industry is so plagued with sales and marketing. You need more leads. You need to do this. You need to do that. That people feel this pressure to continuously bring more people into the business, even though it may be harmful. Yeah. So I would encourage founders to really spend some time and resources focusing on that structure before they think about scaling.
I love what you said too about scaling being a buzzword because I didn't even really realize that till you just said it now, especially too because I think so few people are clear on what that actually means and what the definition of that is. For Is there one operational quick fix slash win that you think almost every founder could implement tomorrow that would be helpful?
I would say for founders, it would probably be a time audit.
Mm.
So, one of the issues that I hear probably on a daily basis when I speak to founders is I don't have enough time. I'm so busy. And I've worked with enough people, enough visionary entrepreneurs. And the data says that that is almost always untrue. And usually, what I do is I have them do a time audit. So, look at your calendar for the last 2 weeks and all activity that you did. Where did you spend your time? Where did it go? And more often than not, I see two things. The first is that they don't use a calendar, which is a problem. And if they do, the second issue is that their time is actually not going towards anything that's moving the needle forwards in the business. It's going towards reactive activity, reacting to emails, reacting to client messages, reacting to Slack messages from their team, reacting to an idea that someone shared with them that they now have to implement because this person said it was a great idea. And they're like, I don't, there's this shiny object syndrome of, "Oh, there's this new funnel that this person says I should try. So we have to implement it today." So I would say doing a time audit and understanding where your time is actually going and then sitting down with that and looking at that and going, okay, so I'm actually not really spending very much time on strategic work. And the activities that I am doing, tactically executing, is very reactive. I'm not doing a 2 hour block of email writing.
Mm.
I'm really just reacting to a bunch of stuff. And then it gets to 5 p.m. and haven't really moved anything forwards. So I'd say that's probably what I would recommend. And it's really, really easy to do, but many struggle to do it, perhaps because of fear of what it's going to uncover, what it's going to show. But it is such a great tool. And I use it myself. I use it with clients. I use it with their teams. The moment someone says to me, I'm so busy, I don't have enough time, I'm like, okay, like let's look at the data. So do a
Hmm.
time limit for me. And then we can sit down and we can really see what's going on because until I can see that, and most people don't have a calendar like mine, which shows where their every minute of every day is going. So a time audit is essentially like a Google sheet with, 4 a.m. till 12 midnight. broken down into 15-minute increments where people log what they are doing. So I give them that and I have them do that. And it's always very telling.
This week's episode is sponsored by Kaya. Kaya is democratizing women's access to funding while treating the multi-trillion-dollar female economy for funding female genius. If you've ever wished you could be part of the excitement of funding and supporting the gorgeous, growing businesses you love without being an accredited investor, this is your moment. Kaya is building something entirely new, an ecosystem women can fund founders they believe in, access curated experiences, and learn how to move like investors together. They're now onboarding for the next rounds of beta and collecting insights from as many women as possible to shape a platform women will be obsessed with. To get involved or join the waitlist, head to kayawomen.net or send Kaya's founder, Haley Handler, a cheeky DM on LinkedIn and step into the future of funding women. I just want to thank Kaya so much for sponsoring this episode. I'm so grateful to have them as our very first sponsor. They are very much a brand that is aligned with the podcast. And now back to the episode. Right. And you've made the distinction / you work with both founders and the right-hand operators. How would you say those roles complement each other?
So this is really interesting because I actually wrote a piece on this yesterday, which I'm going to share today on LinkedIn. That relationship is, in my opinion, the most important relationship in business because it is as complementary as you can get. So I often refer to the visionary operator relationship as a yin and a yang. Because they are complete opposites, and that's why we need both of them. So, a typical visionary is very creative, thrives in chaos, really resists structure, has all these ideas that are coming left, right, and center. Typically, they are very good at sales and marketing, and they want to remove themselves from delivery and operations as quickly as possible. Versus the operator is very, very structured, very regimented. They can look at a lot of things going on and a lot of chaos and make sense of it. So I often think about the operator role as you have like a massive ball of like yarn and the operator pulls at the strings to get them into line as opposed to this like massive ball.
Hmm.
Massive ball being all the ideas that the visionary has. And in business, you need both because ideas are great, but unless you can execute on the right ideas from start to finish, they just remain an idea, which is like a nice thing to have. And similarly, operators are really great at the execution piece, less so with the ideas. So you do really need both in a business. And it's often the operator that runs the team. So CEOs typically, like, textbook visionary entrepreneurs really struggle. They're not very people oriented, or they are, but they're not very people oriented when it comes to managing teams and supporting people versus operators tend to be very likable. They tend to be really empathetic and understanding, and people tend to want to follow them versus visionary entrepreneurs are far less fleet. So teams really struggle to follow them. So they're both essential. And I think the difficulty that I see most small businesses experience is the lack of a solid operator. So typically you see visionary entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers operating solo without that operator right hand, which means that it's very difficult for things to get done the way they should get done. Direction really, really lacks because it's the operator who is able to ground the visionary and go, hey, like, I know that you want to implement this idea, but we have these goals and we've already laid out all the projects that are going to help us get to that goal. And if we don't focus in on that and we start doing this other thing that you want us to do, it's going to detract us from the goal. So is this something that you really want to do at the expense of getting to the goal? And without that, visionaries really struggle. So more often than not, when I talk to solo founders, what we talk about is how to bring on a solid operator and when to do that and how to support the operator as the business grows, because it's a very different skill set. And often the CEO is not the right person to support the operator and doesn't have the skill set to be able to do that and to be able to develop them.
In cases where you are seeing one visionary and one operator, what is the most common breakdown in terms of their execution?
That's a really good question. It's the inability on behalf of the visionary to change a behavior and to maintain that behavior change long term. So, visionary entrepreneurs thrive in chaos. And there's a whole side of the internet that talks about why that is. And it typically stems from something in childhood. But that's not my forte, so I'm not going to touch that. But they thrive in chaos. They get a sense of satisfaction, and there's, a large amount of dopamine that they experience when they kind of throw things into chaos, and then they stay up for ages trying to resolve it. And then they're like, yes, I did it. And that works if you are completely solo. But if you have people around you, if you have a team, your team cannot thrive in chaos. So the biggest breakdown I have seen and I have firsthand witnessed is when things are going really well. You've got the systems, you have a plan, team is thriving, and the visionary goes to an event and they speak to someone and they come back and they're like, we have to do this and we have to do it by tomorrow. And it's 3 p.m. and everyone starts scrambling and throwing things up in the air. And despite the pushback from the operator that this is not the right move, the visionary, usually they're the CEO and they're the boss, go, no, 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 like, trust me, I know we've done this before and it was a mistake, but this is going to work. And then it doesn't. And the operator is the one that has to clean up the mess and pick up the people on the team and dust them off and make sure that they keep going. And when that happens once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, operators tend to be very, very resilient people and very good at compartmentalizing. But when it's a pattern that continues to happen and the visionary sees the kind of havoc that they're causing, that is probably the most damaging thing for the operator, because we thrive in structure and we want to see the results. And if the visionary gave the ideas step back, we would get there. But the continued throwing of, chaos means that we can't. And then the operator is typically the one that's responsible for that end result. So if we don't get there, that's the operator's fault. But again, there's only so much an operator can do if the visionary isn't working with them. So I always say, in order for that relationship to be successful, the visionary has to acknowledge that there are certain behavioral tendencies that they possess that is damaging to growing a business. And they have to make an overt commitment to themselves and to their operator that they're going to do everything they can to not feed into those tendencies.
Hmm.
When that happens, it's brilliant, it's great, and businesses grow and they grow very, very fast and they exceed their goals. When that behavior change doesn't happen, that's when we see issues, and that's when we see the breakdown of the relationship between the operator and their visionary. I've experienced it firsthand and it's awful. There's something very psychologically damaging that happens to the operator when they're having to pick up pieces again and again. And it's like the operator takes the team and the business 5 steps forward, and then the visionary takes them 10 steps back in one moment, in an hour meeting where it's like there's a new idea, we have to do it.
Right.
So it's a very tricky relationship. It requires a lot of trust, commitment to not just make that change, but also continue to uphold that change over time. And it's difficult for both sides. But if you can get there, really incredible things start to happen.
Right. It's so interesting as you're talking about this because this concept is relatively new to me. But in my previous role, cannot the stories I could tell you that it would be like so on the ball for this. So it's really interesting to me that there is this kind of continuous pattern of that occurring in organizations over and over.
Well,
Why do you think that is? I'm just curious, like from my standpoint, because clearly you have seen it all, but
I'll be honest, that's a question that I often try unpack, and it's a issue that I've really tried over the years to make sense of. And what I have landed on as the only kind of logical explanation for me is that in business, CEOs, more often than not, CEOs are visionaries. So in business, CEOs are really put on a pedestal and they are glamorized. And everyone talks, like when we talk about famous business people, Elon Musk, Bezos, Steve Jobs, they're all visionaries. No one talks about the operators behind them. Like who knows, you know, who Bezos's right hand is or Musk's right hand, or we know, Steve Jobs' right hand, but um, more often than not, operators are not talked about. And so there's this, especially with younger, and we're seeing a lot of younger people coming into the business space and adopting these titles of CEOs. And I think, first of all, CEO, usually if you have a C suite level title, it's because there's a board. But for some reason, the lingo in the online space, the startup world, is C suite level. I was given the title of a COO. The company did not have a board. So who am I? Do you know what I mean? Like I'm meant to be reporting to a board. I don't because there
Mhm.
isn't a, so we shouldn't be giving people these, mad, like huge titles that they then have to hold because there's definitely this element of ego and arrogance that I have seen across the board when it comes to visionary entrepreneurs. And I don't see that same level of aggressive confidence when I speak to operators
Hmm.
because operators aren't given the credit that they're due. Usually, when things go right, the CEO is front and center, and that's who we're talking about. When things go wrong, it's the operators who are, at fault. So I think that this issue struggles to be one that is resolved, and it's one that is so present wherever you look, really, because even though the visionary operator relationship, in my opinion, should be one that is equal, like that's not how it is in practice. The visionary is always superior to the operator. And again, in my opinion, you need both. You cannot do what you want to do without both. So it should be an equal partnership, but it's not in practice. And in practice, usually the visionary is the boss.
Hmm.
They veto power. And while eventually they can trust their operator, if they really want to do something, I'll do it.
Right.
And the operator just has to be there to pick up the pieces. And I think for me, that has been the most frustrating part in my journey. Not now, because now, for all intents and purposes, I wear the visionary hat day to day, and I'm still an operator at heart, but my assistant is my operator. But when I was the operator of a company, that is really, really challenging because I would push back on something and I would have every logical reason in the book why this was not a good idea and why this was damaging. And you're told, oh, don't worry, like I've got it, like it's fine. If it doesn't work, I'll sort it out. It's all good. And then 2 months later, you're called in to pick up the pieces. And it's, yeah, the only way that I can put it is psychologically damaging. Like it does
Totally.
something psyche when you're told, we trust you, we trust your opinion, we know, this is your skill set. But then, you know, that isn't shown in practice. So I think in order for this to change, we have to start talking about operators more and their importance in business and their importance in that relationship and what they bring to the table. Because more often than not, the things that we see happen, the revenue numbers, the new clients, all of that stuff would not be possible if it wasn't for what's happening on the back end.
Mm.
But sees that and no one wants to talk about it. People want to talk about how to market yourself better, how to get more sales on your sales call calendar, all of this stuff. And talking about who's behind the scenes making that, a possibility. So that's kind of my take on that. I could be wrong, but you know, I've really sat with that question and tried to be like, I don't get this. Like, why is it like this? And that's I would say the most logical thing that I've arrived to.
Right. So interesting, like such an interesting concept. So I want to change gears a little bit because I'm curious. You've mentioned before a fractional COO, which is not a term I'm really familiar with. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah. So fractional operator is essentially someone that comes into a business for typically a short period of time and helps build out the right infrastructure, maybe hire people on the team, develop people on the team, and then usually takes a step back. So it can look a little bit different. Some people stay on as fractional COOs or CMOs long term, but they're there in not a full-time team capacity. So they may be there part-time, they may be there for specific things. Typically they're responsible for specific metrics, and then how they do that and like how much time they spend doing that is their business. It's not really something that is controlled. But fractional work, I think, is good. If we're talking about fractional operators, I think it's good up until a point,
Mm.
because eventually, if the organization grows, I do think it's really important to have someone in there full time who can see everything and be like a supportive thing for the organization and the team specifically. So I do think it has many benefits. It's great. For me, it isn't like a long-term solution. Eventually, most organizations will benefit greatly from having someone in there full time, because the level of oversight that is required from an operator is very difficult to do that in a fractional capacity
Mm.
long term.
Right. Is there a difference between a consultant and a fractional operator?
Yeah, so I do fractional work for a very small number of clients because, again, for me, the kind of omnipresence that I need to have in each organization, I can't do for a massive number of clients. So I would say the difference between the fractional COO or operator and a consultant is a fractional person will be there for maybe a set period of time. So one of my contracts is a year. So I'm there for a year to make sure that the right infrastructure is there, that the company's moving in the right direction, to push for growth, to hire people, to put things in place to better manage people. And then part of my contract is then to hire someone to replace myself and train them before I take a step back. Consulting, on the other hand, is people can pay me for an hour of my time, and they're just like, I just want to get a sense of what you think the issue is. And it's like, cool, let's book in an hour. I'll ask you various things before the call. We'll go a little bit deeper on the call, and then I'll give you my take. They can also do that for a longer period of time. So, maybe speak to me once a week for a month, or continue that for 3 to 6 months. Very strategic on my side, and I'm not really doing any of the tactical stuff. So with fractional work, I'll get involved, I'll build out infrastructures, I'll look at existing systems and be like, I don't like this doesn't work, let me change it. Okay, let's roll that out.
Mhm.
But consulting, you're not really doing any of the tactical stuff. You're just telling people and advising, hey, like, you really need something like this, or like you need to, sometimes founders will come and they'll be like, I have an assistant, but I'm not really sure like how to delegate to them. Like I feel like they have a lot more capacity. I want to give them more work, but like I'm really scared to like go of this. So we'll talk about that and I'll be like, right, so you should go away and use this tool to like document what you're doing and then hand that over to them. And the next time you do it, they come on a call with you, you share your screen, they'll watch you do it and they can go away and like better the process. So it's more like advising and I'll give them action steps to do, but I won't do the building out for them.
Okay, questions. Always have questions. Um, how are people supposed to know when it's time to hire an operator, and is it ever too soon?
I don't ever think it's too soon. I think it's
Mhm.
too soon if you don't have the finances for it.
Yeah, can't afford it.
Yeah, like don't put yourself out. There's a lot that you can learn. I put together something where I walk founders through getting basic operations in order so that if they don't have an operator, they've got the basics in place
Mhm,
to hold them until they can bring on an operator. And an operator doesn't have to be me, like someone with my experience. If you are like a solo founder and you're just, trying to figure things out, it can be an assistant, it can be a virtual assistant. So usually people in assistant roles or like supportive roles have the skill sets that are needed for an operator at a basic level. So
mhm,
usually they're hyper organized, they can take a mess and like make it make sense. They know how to run a calendar. They know how to that they're quite techy as well. Usually they can figure tech out. If they're not familiar with it, they can go and figure it out. And that's essentially what you need. Most visionaries are not very techy. They really
mhm,
struggle with that sort of management. And if they could just write everything on a Google Doc and give it to someone and that person like puts it into like a system and like prioritizes it, that's generally something that is deemed very, very helpful. So I would say start with an assistant. My assistant started with me, I want like maybe January. She started part time for 3 months. Then I moved her to full time. Now she's full time. Um, and she's been great. And she's also learned a lot of things. I'd say when I interview operators or people in supportive roles, something I really, really look for is when people don't know how to do something. And I learned this from my assistant because I asked her to do something and I know, I knew how to do it. It would have just taken me time. And at the time, I was like, I would rather spend this time doing something else. So I said to her, hey, can you do this? And her response was, I haven't done this before. Give me till tomorrow and I'll get back to you. And I was like, okay, like I'm not in a rush.
mhm.
Um, she came back to me and was like, right. So like, didn't know how to do this. I went and I figured it out. And like, here's what I've come up with. And I was like, fantastic. And that for me is the mark of a really good operator. When I was years ago starting in operations, I didn't know how to do anything. Like I knew how to manage a calendar. That's kind of it. I went and I figured it out. And in that role, more often than not, you're thrown into situations that you have no idea how to like manage, but you have to figure it out. And that for me is like such a key marker of a solid operator, someone who's really proactive, who's generally decent with tech and who can kind of figure stuff out if they need to, because it isn't a similar skill set to a visionary. So you can't be expected to like learn like a ton from the person who you report to, which is very, again, it's a different dynamic because most people manage people who like they've done that role before versus if you're in an operator seat and you report to a visionary, they've never done your role. So you're really kind of having to like figure out how to swim on your own. So that's really, really important. But yeah, start with an assistant. And then from there, if you can develop that person, great. If not, then you have to look for someone else. Sometimes you can develop an assistant into an operator, like a higher level operator, if they're able to grow as fast as the company grows. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not possible. Um, but either way, you've got someone there in a supportive capacity that can help you.
So I want to ask you before we run out of time. I know you're launching a mentorship soon. What is the vision behind that? What's the goal? What's that going to look like?
Yeah. So I always thought, always, as in October of last year when I left and started my own business, I knew that this was going to be the big thing that I was working towards. But for various reasons, I didn't want that to be something that I kind of started formally in October or November or December. It was something that I started working on a few months ago. Um, and essentially, the vision behind that is I think that this is very much the unglamorous side of business, the systems, the infrastructure, how to hire someone, how to fire someone in a small business where you don't have an HR function, how to go about having challenging conversations with your team, all of this stuff. There isn't, from what I've seen, there isn't anything out there that supports whoever is needing to navigate all of those things. There wasn't when I was doing it years ago. And there still isn't something, there are things out there, but there isn't something that I think is really, really solid and does everything with sustainability, fairness, health in mind. So again, I really see business as something that is one of the things that you do, that we get to do. It's not my everything. And it used to be. When it was, I was horrifically unhappy. I was clinically depressed. I was more anxious than what is normal for an already anxious person. But everyone was like, "You're so successful. You're doing so well. You're smashing it." And I was like, I'm dying on the inside. Now I work less. I feel like I have a bigger impact. I have a partner, which I didn't before. I have a dog. I live in my dream home. I am very, very happy. I'm a lot healthier. I sleep more. Um, and I think that I'm able to do that and I'm able to have this life because I've pushed back on how most people do business. And I think having a container. And for me, it was important. It wasn't a course or, just something that you buy and then you go through. I wanted it to be a mentorship. I wanted people to have access to me in a more financially feasible way than an hour of my time is or 2 hours. I wanted to be able to support people through that journey of getting infrastructure in place. I have to have this really hard conversation with this team member because their
Mm,
performance is not where it should be. How do I navigate that? How can you support me? I didn't have that. I had to figure it out. I had to make mistakes. There were lots of tears. There was a lot of stress. It was unnecessary. So my aim with the Growth Systems mentorship is to give people the systems that they need, the blueprint that they need to build a business that works for them, that they can step back from, that they can breathe, that they, love and enjoy, but that they can do other things as well. And also create or help founders create a business that people want to be a part of, where you can take time off and you're not going to lose your mind being so stressed because you're coming back to chaos, or you're going to be pinged while you're on holiday and you feel like you're respected and you're valued and it's fair. How things work is fair, and there's transparency and honesty, because I think so many organizations lack that and no one really talks about that. So that's what I'm hoping to do with this mentorship. I've put in, I think, 3 or 4 people into the mentorship already just to test things and see how things are working. Because it's the first time that I'm running things in this way. And then I'm hoping to launch it, more kind of publicly in the coming months. But I'm really excited about it because it's what I wish I had years ago, and what I wish I could give to founders of small businesses and their operators as well. Because I think it's exactly, and again, I'm biased because it's mine, but I think it's exactly what people need to get that, solid foundations in place, and then just grow happily.
yeah. Well, I think that is the perfect note to wrap up on. Where can people find you, Noor?
So I'm on LinkedIn, not I really struggle with social media. I'm not a fan, but I love LinkedIn so much, and that has been amazing for me. Met so many. We met on LinkedIn. I met so many incredible people on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is where I'm active. I'm there daily, and I also have Instagram, which I'm trying to make an active effort to be on, and to show a little bit more behind the scenes of kind of what I do day to day as well. And so those are, I would say, my two key platforms.
Mhm. And do you have a website or is LinkedIn still the best avenue?
LinkedIn is still the best avenue. I have various sites linked in my featured section. So
Mhm.
growth mentorship is there. And then I have a bunch of resources as well that people can use for free. So the 14 days where I walk you through basic ops and set that up with you is there. It's called 14 days ops overhaul. And then there are some free templates there. I think I have a project management one, and the time audit that I mentioned are also there.
Okay, perfect. And your socials and everything will be linked in the show notes as well. But
Amazing.
well, thank you so much for joining me. Like, this
Thank
has
you.
been a great episode. I'm so excited for people to hear this.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.